My name is Jennifer Steverson. I currently work for the City of Austin Parks and Recreation Department. I graduated from the University of Texas with a master's degree in urban and regional planning. And before I moved to Texas, I worked in New York. I studied education and cultural studies at the New School, and then I worked for a long time at Weeksville Heritage Center, which is an African American historic house museum in Brooklyn, New York. And a lot of what I did at Weeksville was trying to find a way to interpret the research for elementary school age children, for teachers, and for adults and families in the area. Education is still a really important part of how I think about how to use archival materials and make them accessible. I've heard a lot about the Texas Purple Hole Pea Festival, and I've always wanted to come and visit because of my interest in gardening and and the different kind of foodways that are in the Freedom Colonies. And so I was speaking with Andrea and with Laretha. I told them about my project, and they thought that it would be a good fit. So I was excited about the opportunity to come and learn more and to visit this part of Texas. I've always had a real interest in free communities, and so when I came to Texas and started learning about the different freedmen communities that existed in Austin, I really wanted to know more about those places because a lot of them were kind of concentrated in what's now central Austin, but a lot of those places are kind of invisible to people. If you're traveling through a park like Pease Park near downtown, you might not know that that used to be a freedmen community. Austin's infamous 1928 plan was the plan where they designated a Negro district in what's in East Austin. You can see that right here, this is East Avenue, what's now I-35. And so the city mandated that all communities of color move to the eastern side of town. What I've done on this map is you can see that the squares that exist that are yellow, green, and blue are free African American communities that used to exist in West Austin. The yellow box that's kind of to the north is Wheatville. That community existed along the banks of Shoal Creek. Further south, I don't have it on this map, but further south along Shoal Creek in what's now west downtown Austin was Clarksville, which is still the home of Sweet Home Missionary Baptist Church, which is one of the anchor institutions that still exist in Austin. Then you can see the green box further south on the east side, that is Pleasant Hill. That area is, if you guys are familiar with the French Legation Museum in Austin, that knoll is kind of where the French Legation Museum is now. And then you had Masontown, which was a community of African Americans and also of immigrants. There were a lot of Germans who lived there as well that existed along the train tracks, so it was a more industrial area. So I did this map originally to kind of show people what the impact of segregating laws were on the city of Austin. But now I'm kind of using this map as a base map for these maps that I want to create to look at what the landscape would have been like when Wheatville was around. The project that I'm working on now is to make maps, artistic maps, cultural kind of cartography representations of these different communities. And what I'm interested in doing is understanding what these communities would have looked like, but also the natural environment that people would have founded these communities in, what they would have done with the land, how they chose to develop these settlements. And a lot of the Black communities in Austin existed along floodplains and in other areas because that's the land that was available. And so I think there's a really interesting connection between all the creeks that run through Austin and where these free Black settlements existed. A lot of the communities that I'm studying were founded right after the Civil War in the 1860s, but very few of them are still around today. A lot of them were displaced by the 1928 plan of Austin, which forced a lot of Black people, all Black people, most Black people in Austin to move to the east side, which is now known as the heart of the Black community there. but I really wanted to know more about these places that existed before. And I feel like especially with things that have been going on, you know, recently for Black people in America, I really wanted to understand how people in the past kind of lived through difficult times and like how they were able to do so much in difficult times. The first map that I'm making is of the Wheatville community, and that community was founded along the banks of Shoal Creek. Shoal Creek is like just west of Lamar Boulevard in Austin, North Lamar, and it's north of UT. So if you're looking at just the land that's there, it's so incredibly valuable. So I wanted to understand like how that land changed hands and just more about what the community would have looked like. I've seen the community on maps and I've read descriptions of it, but I've never actually seen somebody try and describe physically like what was it like did people own farms, what churches were there. So I'm trying to dig through archives to find photographs and descriptions of what people's houses were like, and then I want to show that through my art practice. This is the first one that I've started, so you can see that. I'll pass this around, but this large line is what's now known as Town Lake and Lady Bird Lake. So this is the Colorado River, and then this dotted line here is Shoal Creek. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to layer on basically images of Shoal Creek from different periods in time so that people can start to see this is what Shoal Creek was like in 1895. This is what it looks like today with Lamar Boulevard and all of these embankments. I love digging through archives and being at the History Center, but I know that a lot of people don't have the time or maybe the interest in digging through all those papers to find fascinating things. And so I feel like art is a really good way to make that information relevant for younger generations, especially when you think about just, you know, like the age of Instagram and like images are so important. That's kind of what people grasp onto. So I want to find images that are compelling to people, but I also want to try and focus in on, I'm trying to remember what Andrea called this, but like intangible culture that people can relate to, especially younger people. Even though they might not know that these communities existed, I'm hoping that through the maps that they'll see something that they recognize in their own families and that they'll get interested in finding out more about where they're from. And even in terms of the city of Austin, I feel like I want, you know, teachers to be able to talk with their students about how important and vital these early Black communities were. You know, if it's something that they feel like they can get involved in that way, then it makes it more interesting. And I think that there's a lot of material that's out there that's in archives, but it's like, I want to try and maybe uncover some history or some resources that teachers can use. Well, I think, you know, one of the reasons I'm calling this project Holding Ground is that when I think about my own experiences with gardening and making food, like I was able to learn my family history by talking with my grandmother in the kitchen, by talking with my grandfather while we were in the garden. And so I think that there's a really important connection. I think it's important for, especially in cities, for young people to connect with the land in a way that makes sense for them. I think, you know, gardening and learning about the ecosystem that you live in is one way for kids to get excited about the places where they live, you know, and to learn about how the different skills that their families have used over time to survive really difficult times. I think that's important. And I think that right now that there is kind of a disconnect between, especially in cities, like the amount of time that kids get to spend outside, even in schools. You know, some of these skills that are so important are being lost when you talk about the different varieties that farmers were growing or that people were growing in their gardens. In some cases, you had people carrying seeds across state lines because they were important. They were like the wealth of the family. And so that's something that I think is important to preserve. In terms of the project that I'm working on, Holding Ground, I really want people to know that there are ways to make these archival materials come alive for people, and that you can record history and the stories of your family in a lot of different ways.